The grain elevator office smelled like diesel and burnt coffee at 6 in the morning. Outside, frost still clung to the gravel lot. Someone laughed before she'd even finished raising her hand. That laugh was the only sound in the room for a full 3 seconds, and nobody bothered to lower their voice. A woman bidding on 300 acres of bottomland was not something the men at Hargrove Grain Co-op had seen before. Not from someone holding a toddler's mitten in her coat pocket instead of a checkbook in her hand. They didn't know yet what she'd done with 18 months and a notebook. Renee Caldwell had grown up 40 minutes from that elevator, on land her grandfather cleared with a mule team and a borrowed 4-tractor back when the county still had 2 grocery stores. She heard the story from her, years later, sitting at a kitchen table with coffee gone cold between them. Her husband had died on a Tuesday in March, on a stretch of county road that froze every winter and that the township never salted properly. A semi-truck, a patch of black ice, and that was it. No drawn-out illness, no time to prepare. Just a phone call at 7:40 in the morning and a life rearranged before lunch. She was left with 2 kids, $1,100 in savings, and 40 acres that hadn't turned a real profit in 6 years because her husband had been the one who understood the soil, the drainage, the timing of it all. Renee had grown up around farming, but understanding a kitchen garden and running $1,100 against a planting season were 2 very different kinds of knowing. What she did have was patience and a stubborn habit of writing things down. Grocery lists, kids' fevers, the dates the well pump acted up. That habit became something else entirely once she set her sights on the Granger parcel. 300 acres of bottomland along Miller Creek that had gone up for bid after old man Granger passed with no children willing to take it on. Everyone said the land was tired. Everyone said it flooded too often to be worth the asking price. Renee had walked it 11 times before anyone else bothered to walk it once. The county extension agent, a man named Dale Pruitt who'd held the job for 19 years, told her plainly that the Granger bottomland wasn't suited for a first-time operator. He said it kindly enough, the way people say things when they've already decided the conversation is over. He'd seen the soil reports from a survey done in 2003. He hadn't seen anything since. That ground floods every spring you can't predict, he told her, leaning against his truck instead of going inside to check anything current. Established operations have struggled with it. I wouldn't want you in over your head. The bank wasn't much warmer. A loan officer at Continental Trust reviewed her application twice before sliding it back across the desk and asking if she had a co-signer, someone with what he called established farm experience. He wasn't cruel about it. He was just in a hurry, and the next file on his desk belonged to a man he'd known for 15 years. Word moved through the co-op the way it always did, fast and without much patience for nuance. A widow with 2 kids was bidding on ground that experienced operators had backed away from. People didn't say it was a bad idea directly to her face, not most of them. They said it to each other, in the parking lot, over the hood of a truck, the kind of talk that travels exactly as far as it's meant to. Renee didn't argue with any of it. She didn't correct Dale Pruitt's flood numbers out loud. She thanked the loan officer for his time. Then she went home, put her kids to bed, and started walking the Granger land with a flashlight and a notebook that cost $1.49 at the hardware store in town. She started in October when the bottomland still held its summer growth and nobody else had reason to be out there. She walked it in work boots 2 sizes too big, borrowed from her late husband's closet, because her own boots weren't built for standing water. The first thing she noticed didn't match what Dale Pruitt had described. The flooding wasn't random the way the old reports suggested. It followed a pattern tied to a culvert under the county road, one that had been partially collapsed for at least a decade. She found it choked with silt and an old fence post that had washed down from somewhere upstream. She wrote the measurement in her notebook. The culvert opening was supposed to run 36 inches across. It had narrowed to roughly 14. That single obstruction was backing water on his 60 acres every time the creek rose more than 8 inches. The rest of the parcel, the higher 240 acres, almost never flooded at all. She went back in November with a tape measure and a cheap soil probe she bought secondhand from a retiring farmer 2 towns over. She tested 22 separate points across the property, marking each one on a hand-drawn map taped inside the notebook's back cover. The soil wasn't tired. It was under-tested. The organic content in the upper field ran higher than anything on the outdated 2003 survey, likely from 2 decades of unharvested cover crop reseeding itself year after year with nobody around to till it under. She found her second discovery in December, half buried near the old equipment shed. Drainage tile installed sometime in the 1970s, still partially functional, that nobody currently bidding on the property seemed to know existed. She traced almost 400 feet of it by hand, probing the frozen ground with a steel rod until she hit the telltale hollow knock of buried clay pipe. Her third discovery came in January, the quietest one and the one that mattered most. She walked it in work boots 2 sizes too big, borrowed from her late husband's closet, because her own boots weren't built for standing water. The first thing she noticed didn't match what Dale Pruitt had described. The flooding wasn't random the way the old report suggested. It followed a pattern tied to a culvert under the county road, one that had been partially collapsed for at least a decade. She found it choked with silt and an old fence post that had washed down from somewhere upstream. She wrote the measurement in her notebook. The culvert opening was supposed to run 36 inches across. It had narrowed to roughly 14. That single obstruction was backing water on his 60 acres every time the creek rose more than 8 inches. The rest of the parcel, the higher 240 acres, almost never flooded at all. She went back in November with a tape measure and a cheap soil probe she bought secondhand from a retiring farmer 2 towns over. She tested 22 separate points across the property, marking each one on a hand-drawn map taped inside the notebook's back cover. The soil wasn't tired. It was under-tested. The organic content in the upper field ran higher than anything on the outdated 2003 survey, likely from 2 decades of unharvested cover crop reseeding itself year after year with nobody around to till it under. She found her second discovery in December, half buried near the old equipment shed. Drainage tile installed sometime in the 1970s, still partially functional, that nobody currently bidding on the property seemed to know existed. She traced almost 400 feet of it by hand, probing the frozen ground with a steel rod until she hit the telltale hollow knock of buried clay pipe. Her third discovery came in January, the quietest one and the one that mattered most. Renee submitted a Freedom of Information request to the township in early March, asking specifically for culvert maintenance records along that stretch of road going back 15 years. It took 3 weeks to come back. When it did, she read it twice at her kitchen table, then folded it into the back of her notebook next to her soil readings. She put in her bid on a Thursday. She showed the photographs of the drainage tile she'd uncovered by hand. She laid out, in plain numbers, what the actual usable acreage looked like once the culvert was repaired, a fix the township was now obligated to perform at township expense given the documented maintenance failure. The bank's original appraisal had valued the flood-prone 60 acres at $12,000 total, assuming permanent unusable status. Renee's documentation, backed now by the county engineer's own findings, supported a corrected appraisal closer to $81,000 once drainage was restored, a finding the engineer confirmed aloud, almost reluctantly, looking down at his own report as he said it. The room went quiet in a way it hadn't been quiet before. Not awkward, just still. Dale Pruitt didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he asked, quietly, where she'd gotten the drainage tile measurements. She told him, hand probe for 100 feet, December, frozen ground. The competing grain operation withdrew its bid 2 days later, citing revised cost projections. The livestock outfit followed within the week. Renee's bid, contingency satisfied, closed at the original lower number she'd offered, a number that now reflected land worth nearly 7 times what the bank had been prepared to lend against. Word spread the way it always does in a place like that. Slow, sideways, mostly through people who weren't in the... Renee didn't bring any of it up again. She didn't correct anyone's second-hand version of the story at the feed store. She planted that spring with a borrowed Kubota tractor, since she couldn't yet afford her own equipment, and she kept the same notebook in her glove compartment, now filled with new pages, planting dates, rainfall totals, the slow, unglamorous math of a working farm. Her kids went back to school each Monday the same as before. The well pump still acted up in August. Life didn't transform into something cinematic. It just continued, steadier than it had been, with $1,100 in savings now replaced by something harder to measure, but easier to live inside. People at the co-op still talked about the meetings sometimes, usually when someone new showed up trying to lowball a piece of difficult ground. Ask Renee Caldwell, they'd say. She never asked to be the example. She just kept walking her fields at dawn, the way she always had. If you've ever had someone underestimate you in a room you weren't supposed to be standing in, hit subscribe. Wherever you're watching this from, whatever ground you're trying to hold on to, there's a good chance somebody told you it couldn't be done before you'd even finished asking. Stories like Renee's don't happen often, but they happen more than people expect in places exactly like the one you might be sitting in right now. There's a particular kind of knowledge that doesn't come from a degree or a title. It comes from walking the same 100 yards of ground in October, then again in December, then again in January, until the land starts telling you things it never told anyone in a hurry. Renee never set out to prove a room wrong. She set out to understand 60 acres nobody else had bothered to look at twice. The proving happened almost as an afterthought, the way truth tends to arrive when nobody's rushing it. Most of what changes a person's circumstances isn't loud. It's a flashlight in October, a tape measure in November, a public records request that takes 3 weeks to come back, and that almost nobody else thinks to file. It's a notebook that costs less than a cup of coffee, filled slowly, with no audience, by someone who isn't trying to be believed yet, just trying to be right. The land along Miller Creek floods less now. The culvert was repaired that summer, on schedule, at the township's expense. Renee still walks the field some mornings before the kids wake up, out of habit more than necessity. She says the ground looks different once you've measured it yourself. Not better, just clearer. And maybe that's the only real difference between the people who get to stand in a room and the people who get to be heard in it. Somebody, at some point, did the walking nobody else wanted to do.